Gracias a ustedes para la invitación venir acá a compartir los compromisos, a los valores del sistema B de nuestra compañía Patagonia. Pero con su permiso ahora me voy a cambiar a inglés. Será mejor para mí, mucho mejor para ustedes. And a good place to start is explaining that Patagonia is still a privately held company. We're still owned by the family of our founder, Yvon Chouinard, who's the guy with the hammer, and who still comes in to the office every day that he isn't fly fishing or surfing, which means he's not really in the office much anymore. But he started as a blacksmith, making pitons and carabiners and hammers, hardware for climbers. And he opened a blacksmith shop in Ventura, California. And he located it there because it was just a short walk to a good surf break. And he also hired his buddies that were referred to appreciatively and today even reverentially as dirtbags. There's no hay traducción para la palabra dirtbags. But by the early 70s, Yvon expanded the product line to a few items of clothing for climbers, shirts and pants and clothes that were made with the same dedication to quality as the climbing hardware. And in fact, back then, the clothes were called software as opposed to hardware, but we had to drop that name when this guy up in Seattle named Bill Gates ripped us off. But the clothes were still designed by dirtbags, and they were worn by dirtbags, and that became the founding culture that we captured in the early photographs that we ran in the Patagonia catalogs, where we tried never to take ourselves too seriously. We tried to avoid hiring professional athletes and instead use photographs of the lunatic fringe of our sports. And we wanted to show that our clothes were for women as much as they were for men, so we ran photographs that showed the true story of what it's like to be a mom in a world where everything isn't always perfect. And we love photographs like this one because they came in from our customers, and the photographs were definitely what today you would call politically incorrect. And the most politically incorrect photograph we ever ran was this one, that we ran this photograph 30 years ago, and we still get thousands of letters. In fact, you can Google Patagonia baby toss, and you'll get 452,000 hits with comments like, "This photograph makes me sick." But because of shots like this, maybe we've been called the coolest company on the planet. So how did that happen? How do you create the coolest company in the world? Well, let's start with our history, beginning with the fact that especially in those early days, we were the people that we made our products for. We were skiers and surfers and climbers, and we were our own customers, and to a large extent we still are. And Yvon and I go way back as climbing partners with lots of adventures under our belts, and including this one in Alaska after a successful ascent of Denali, the highest mountain in North America. And I'll just say that there's more than alcohol involved in the photograph and leave it at that. But Yvon and I have climbed in many places, including Patagonia, the place here in South America, in Chile and Argentina, where in 1968, Yvon made what back then was only the third ascent of Fitzroy, that high peak on the skyline, as most of you know, with his lifelong climbing partner, Douglas Tompkins. And it was a super influential trip on both of them. And I'm going to let Yvon tell that story in this film clip from a movie we made called 180 South.
And picked up a 16mm Bolex camera to record the trip. Loaded the car up with surfboards and climbing gear and took off for a 10,000-mile trip down south. I think from the time we decided to go, it was like 2 weeks before we went. We bought this old van and took off from Ventura. 1968, you gotta remember the Pan American Highway was pretty wild. It was dirt road from Mexico City all the way south. It was like being in Montana or Wyoming 100 years ago. Here we're in an area that's the size of the whole American West, with no people.
For those of us that grew up going out into the wilds of the world, where nature was basically untouched, we got into our souls a sense of beauty.
That trip had a big influence on both Doug and I. It kind of set the course for what we were going to do later in life. For me, it was the best trip of my life.
So after he returned from Patagonia was when Yvon started to sell those few items of clothing that were made for climbers. And in 1973, he decided to spin that part of the business off. And this was only 5 years after that climb of Fitzroy. And that's where the inspiration came from to call the clothing business Patagonia. And that's where the logo came from. That high point on your jacket is Fitzroy. So sports like climbing and skiing and surfing are the foundation of the company. But our experiences that came from those sports, that is the direct inspiration of our commitment to environmental protection. And when Yvon climbed Fitzroy in the 60s, it was surrounded by complete wilderness. And he and I went back there exactly 20 years later. And what was previously wilderness was now this grid of roads and street signs and survey markers for what soon became the city in Argentina of Chaltén. It was seeing firsthand the effects of the continued clear-cutting of the beech forests that are going to take generations to regrow if they ever do. And we witnessed the overgrazing that led to erosion of the grasslands, some even turning into deserts. And maybe most alarming, with our own eyes, we witnessed the places that we had climbed in our youth begin to disappear. We were witnessing geologic change, geologic time happening in human time. And when we began to understand that, to try to get our heads around the unprecedented impact that we humans were having on the planet, we felt that we were morally obligated to do something about it. And since we were in business, we had to ask ourselves how we could use business as a tool for protection of our environment and our planet, for the protection of human health, for the protection of our employees. And that's what we did. And those goals became our core values that included supporting the B Corp movement when it started in the early 2000s. And in 2011, we also supported an effort to get the state of California to officially recognize benefit corporations. And when the law passed successfully, we were the first company in line at our state capital in Sacramento, and we became the first benefit corporation in California, the first B Corp. And this allowed us to reincorporate our business around our core values that could only be changed by a unanimous vote of our board of directors, giving us assurance that into the far future, as far as we could see, our company would remain in business to realize our commitments to our stakeholders and not just, as Jay told you earlier, to our shareholders. And it also forced us to put into words our core values, because now we were required to state those values into new articles of incorporation. Our official corporate charter with the state of California, around which our board of directors was now legally required to manage the company. And there were 6 of them, starting with our commitment to philanthropy called 1% for the planet. The next is our commitment to always make the highest quality and most durable products possible, and at the same time to make those products causing no unnecessary harm. We were also committed to causing no unnecessary harm to our employees or any people who work with us. We're committed to influencing other businesses to follow our lead, and we're committed to transparency, to being honest about what we do that's good as well as what we do that's bad. And finally, we were committed to always supporting our employees and their families with programs that included on-site childcare and a development center, which was one of the best ones in the world. Now let's look at these examples, starting with the 1% for the Planet initiative, where we take 1% of our sales and give it back to environmental nonprofits. And this is serious money, because 1% of sales, not profits, So every year, rain or shine, that money goes into a fund that's granted to grassroots nonprofits with volunteers like these guys trying to save the Colorado River. And I mean, how can you not give a grant to these guys? We think of our 1% commitment as a voluntary earth tax, money that we give away to offset what we're doing as a business that we know causes harm, despite our effort to minimize that harm. And in our last fiscal year, from May to May 2018, we made over 1,200 grants to environmental nonprofits worldwide. And these were grants that were managed by 550 of our employees who volunteered to review all those applications. And the grants included $2.8 million to groups worldwide fighting climate change, and $2.6 million to groups working to protect public lands, including money to support the creation of the national parks here in Chile with our partner, Chris. Now let's look at our commitment to building the best product while causing no unnecessary harm. Well, we make the best product because in addition to lowering the product's footprint, durability is pretty important if you're climbing a big wall in the Andes. And the quality, where the jacket makes a difference of whether you're going to live or survive. And it's the same if you're surfing big waves in cold water. And you can see here with our surfing ambassador, Ramon Navarro, at his home break here in Chile, in Pichilemu. But Ramon expects us not only to make that best wetsuit, but to make it causing no unnecessary harm. And that meant replacing the component in the fabric made from traditional neoprene, which is made from petroleum, with rubber from rubber trees that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from traditional neoprene by about 80%. And the rubber forests were in Guatemala, where the locals have been tapping the trees for over 7 decades, and the plantations are certified by the Rainforest Alliance. But we wanted to see the condition of the forest for ourselves, so we sent Ramon to Guatemala to talk to the workers, to assess the health of the forest, so that as much as possible, we could know the supply chain firsthand, all the way to the trees. And the same is true for our down products, our jackets, where we've traced every feather on every farm to the geese to make sure they're not being force-fed or live-plucked. And that's pretty hard to do, to trace your full supply chain, as you see in this sketch from a video we made called What the Pluck. But we also, of course, want to make sure we're causing no unnecessary harm to people. And that's another commitment to our Articles of Incorporation as a B Corp. This means that we have to have operations that provide safe and comfortable environments for our employees in buildings that have the lowest environmental footprint we can achieve. And we also try to help them live as responsibly as they can. Last year, our Drive Less program, carpooling and bike-to-work programs, eliminated nearly 1 million miles from commutes that the employees otherwise would have had to make. And we also treated our employees in the factories and our supply chain fairly. And the way we do that is through our fair trade effort that provides transparent assurance that all our fair trade products are made under safe working conditions where the workers have a voice and they can earn a fair wage. And in spring 2019, we want our line to have 50% fair trade. So our goal is to make it 100% as soon as possible. Now, the next core value is our commitment to inspiring other companies to adopt our business model. And we do that by sharing best practices, like we are with you guys, showing companies how that creates business value. And that example includes our CEO, Rose Macario, who's on the board of Danone Corporation. And with our assistance, they became the largest publicly traded B corporation in the world. And Danone, we're trying to influence other companies to follow our lead. We've partnered with them to try to scale what's called regenerative farming. This is why we've made a brand extension into food that's called Patagonia Provisions, because we recognize that of all the activities we humans go about on the planet, producing food has the biggest impact to the environment, but it also has the biggest promise to offer solutions. And right now we have just a handful of products, fruit bars and breakfast cereals and soups and a jerky made out of American bison. And just recently we have a new addition we're all super excited about. It's beer. Patagonia is now making beer. And we call it long root ale. And that's because it's made from a perennial wheat called kernza that grows extremely long roots, as you can see in this photo of kernza alongside traditional industrial wheat. Now, when you have roots this long, there's two things happen. And listen carefully, this is so important. First, the roots turn the soil into a sponge. They soak and retain water. And second, the root systems support an explosion of microorganisms in the soil, all living things that are made out of carbon. So the soil begins to pull carbon out of the air and store it back into the ground. So how much carbon? Well, the data is still coming in from farms around the world, but scientists are beginning to estimate that if half of the Earth's farming and grazing converted to regenerative techniques, that alone would get our atmospheric carbon back to pre-industrial levels. Just imagine that. So, back to the core values. Another in our B Corp Articles of Incorporation is our commitment to transparency. It includes transparency about our supply chain, where on our website you can go to what we call the Footprint Chronicles and see a map of all of our suppliers around the world with reports about their environmental footprints of their factories. The next B Corp commitment is our pledge to support our workers with healthy and sustainable workplace that doesn't force them to make decisions between their work lives and their personal lives. And the main initiative to achieve that is our on-site corporate child development center. And visitors to our headquarters in California often say the company feels just like a family, and that's because it is a family with mothers and fathers taking their kids to visit them at their desk. And in fact, that's my eldest daughter there who works at the company, and she was kid number 1 in the daycare center, and that's her daughter, my granddaughter, who's enrolled in our child development center. Now, I think you can call that employee retention. And we'll see what CODA ends up doing, but you can also call it employee recruitment. Well, parents are also encouraged to take a few minutes off to visit the kids in the daycare center. And this is one of the many reasons that we've been consistently rated among the best companies in the world for women. And we have complete parity between women and men at every level in the company. And we also now have pay parity. The women are making as much as the men, except at the very top level in the C-suite. Well, thank you. And in the C-suite, we don't quite have parity yet because the women are making a lot more money than the men are. So those are our core values that we report biannually in our B Corp report, where in the most recent one we got 152 points out of the 200 possible. But our commitment to using our business to lower environmental impact and increase social justice has also created enormous business value for Patagonia. And it can do the same thing for every one of you in the room. And that business value is in 7 categories, and each one is a reason that you should become a B Corp if you're not already. And the first one is that committing to sustainability simply saves you money. If you manage the energy inputs in your entire supply chain, you're going to lower your company's environmental footprint, and you're going to save money doing it. And the second point of value creation is the rewards to your brand, the good press, the improved relations with NGOs, with government agencies. And the third is the flip side of brand reward, and that's the decrease in brand risk. If you have environmental or labor issues in your supply chain and you don't know about them, that's enormous risk. And there are many examples of companies that have paid a price for not knowing what's going on in their supply chain, like Nike, as some of you know. And the fourth business value is the rapid increase in the use of sustainability filters by equity fund managers. And Jay mentioned this briefly in his presentation. It's one of the main reasons that Unilever stock has increased 200% since Paul Pullman's been running the company. And remember Danone that Jay mentioned and that I told you about has become a big French B Corp. Well, this year in May, a consortium of 12 banks in Europe led by BNP Paribas gave Danone a $2 billion line of credit at a favorable rate from their competitors because they were a B Corporation. Think about that. Now, the fifth reason that managing sustainable delivers value is because it gets you in front of regulation. Managing carbon intensity will give you a competitive advantage if you're in a market that introduces a carbon tax like you have done here in Chile. And the sixth reason is that you get enhanced recruitment and retention that I already told you about it. At Patagonia, when we have job openings, sometimes we get hundreds, even thousands, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 applications for each opening. And the seventh and final reason is that the growing number of consumers who want goods and services from companies committed to sustainability. And they do this because they can help lead more responsible lives that way. It can lower their personal footprints on the planet, and more people are making this personal commitment because they know that for every man, woman, and child on our planet, we're currently using 1.5 times the resources that our planet can restore. And as some of you probably know, that in our country, the United States, on a per capita business, we're using the equivalent of 7 Earths every year. And you don't need an MBA to know that that is not sustainable, that long-term, those numbers are going to lead us to the cliff. But it is possible to reduce our footprint to taking from the Earth only what the Earth can give back, making a commitment to become a B Corp, to join the B Corp movement. And so we at Patagonia want, for that reason, to thank all of you today, this afternoon, for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you.